Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about the Supernova Era by Cixin Liu, who is probably my favorite author of all time. At some point I'm going to get around to making that list, but he is definitely going to be in the top 5 at the worst, and he's probably number 1. He is obviously the author of the Three-Body Problem, which is his most well-known work. That's the Three-Body Problem, Dark Force, and this, and it just got a Netflix adaptation, super popular, won Hugos, all of that stuff, all of the accolades. That is where you know this author from. And after reading that series, I read a couple of his other books and have honestly just fallen in love with his writing. And it's not even so much his character development, because that's very lacking. It's not the way he actually writes stories, though it is something that I'm somewhat attached to, but I don't think a lot of other people will be. It is the ideas that he brings to the table. And I think that's an important thing to note. This is not going to be a character book. If you're looking for characters, that is not the case. The characters in this book their names could be replaced with American Citizen 1, American Citizen 2, British Citizen 1, Chinese Citizen 1, 2, 3. That is the depth of the character development that really happens in the story. There is maybe one or two kind of impactful moments, but for the most part, this is not a character book. One other important thing I think that I need to mention in this book is that this was written in 1993. So some of the ideas that Cixin Liu ends up exploring in this book are even more mind-blowing when you think about when he thought of these ideas and actually put that into writing. Some of the ideas now are much more mainstream and are things like the idea of like a generative AI that can take all of this information and boil it down into one individual point is something that's explored in this book. That's pretty like run-of-the-mill technology today for a lot of people. Most people are familiar with some kind of large language model or something. 1993, I feel like that is much further out there for most people. So I do just want to mention that because that is something that kind of blew me away when I was reading this book. And I will say, if you are interested in reading this book, before I even give you what this book is about, I highly suggest that you click off of this video and go into it completely blind. The event that kicks off this book blew me away, caught me completely by surprise. I had no idea what this book was going to be or what it was about going into it, and I honestly think that really elevated my reading experience. So if you are even somewhat interested in this book, once again, don't watch this video because I'm going to not even spoil it. This happens like 5% of the way into the book. Like, this is very early stages, but I really do think that not knowing what was going on was a huge benefit going into this book. With that slight disclaimer out of the way, the idea behind this book that really kicks off everything is that a supernova from a far, far away galaxy goes off, and obviously that hits Earth and it's undetected, so humanity is not prepared for it, and the ramifications of that are everybody over the age of 13, everybody, no matter what, is going to die. Now, they are not going to die instantly. It's not like something that happens immediately. They have about a year of time to try to prepare everybody under the age of 13 to run the world afterwards. And there are a lot of really interesting ideas that are explored with that, and we'll get into that when we get to the plot section of this video, but that is the basic kicking off point of this book. I ended up giving this book a 4-star rating. I don't think that will be a common sentiment for a lot of people. Once again, this is an author who he clicks with me. He feels like he writes books that are just like perfect for me. Once again, don't think that's going to be the case for most people. 4-star rating for me. Now let's go ahead. I'll quickly touch on the prose, quickly touch on the characters, because the real meat and potatoes here are the plot. So when it comes to the prose of this story, I really jive with it. Once again, don't think a lot of people will. It is very dry. It's kind of straightforward. It's a little blunt, I think would be a good way to say it. Obviously, I'm not an English professor over here or anything. I can't give the best way to explain some of these things, but this is how it makes it feel. This is how it affected me as I read. For me, this is actually a positive writing for this kind of story. I think for most people, they'll think it's kind of boring, maybe a little dry, a little bit like a textbook almost. So keep that in mind when you go in and start to read this, that, you know, it's not going to be the most flowery writing, and it might not grip you the same way that writing can in some other novels. Once again, I think I already mentioned the characters here are really two-dimensional. They are really, I almost want to say, caricatures of certain parts of society from a few individual countries. We specifically follow mostly children from China and America, and then there are one or two from, you know, miscellaneous countries that we kind of get some interactions with as the story progresses, but it is mostly a very focused story on China and America. And I mean, obviously in any story there's going to be a little bit of character growth, but for the most part there's not. These are templates to push the ideas along, which is an interesting thing to say. And other people have said this about the Three-Body Problem trilogy as well, that, you know, the characters are flat and that they're not really important, and that the story is what pulls the characters along, and it's not the characters pushing the plot along. And that is definitely the case here. Now, getting to that plot, Obviously, can't talk too much about it. I'd already mentioned everybody under the age of 13 is going to die. And some of the interesting ideas that are explored to that is, well, obviously the basic idea is to have every child just replace their parents. So, for example, the child of a postal carrier is going to be a postal carrier. The child of a general is going to be the general. The child of a fighter pilot is going to be a fighter pilot. Some really deep themes are explored here, mostly the idea of war, and there's also the idea of like, what would a world run by children look like, and how different would it be from like the adult world where everybody has a fully formed brain? There are some really interesting passages about how that looks in different countries, and I mentioned AI earlier. You know, they end up using AI to like communicate in all kinds of different ways that is just so mind-blowing and so ahead of its time. In 1993, I keep going back to that because I really think it affected how I felt about this book in general. Knowing that these ideas were there is just one of those things that I really appreciate when it comes to my reading. I do want to say, I think my biggest takeaway from this book, after the initial shock of everybody over the age of 13 dying, is to me, it felt like a very, high focus on war games and some of that posturing that happens in real life, where country A is doing something, so country B does something, and there's that posturing back and forth. And I found that really interesting because Cixin Liu is able to look at all these problems in such a peculiar way. He really is able to, change the lens of how he's looking at this. For example, in America, and obviously this is where I kind of get to that caricature of a culture. America is like a gun-infested wasteland of kids, but to them it's all play, right? So when we have a character visiting America and they're just like driving through the streets and it's just constant gunfights, but they actually stop it, talk to them, and they're playing a game, and people are literally switching sides of this real-life gun game, and it's just such an interesting idea to look at. And obviously this is just one part of society that he really focused on and like emphasized, but it just really kind of blew my mind that he was able to come up with these different avenues for people to be affected by, and just how strange it would be to actually live in a world where children were running everything. In closing, once again, this is another Cixin Liu book that I'm not sure I could recommend to a lot of people. If you are a really big fan of the three-body problem, I would actually suggest you start with Ball Lightning, which is another story he wrote. That I think is a better place than here. This story is definitely much further out there. You really obviously have to suspend so much disbelief if you're going to sit and enjoy this book. It's not the most hard sci-fi thing he's ever written, but it definitely is full of a lot of interesting ideas and concepts that are explored through a very interesting lens. So many things are explored from an adult perspective because that's normally who's telling the story, right? And to get that lens shifted and to try to tell it through a child's point of view, even though obviously it's still written by an adult and it's way out there and it's crazy and everything like that. It is very interesting, and there are some parts of this book that I really connected with. It lost me a little bit at the end, but I still overall really enjoyed my time with it. Let me know if you have read anything else by Cixin Liu. If you plan on picking up Supernova Era, definitely let me know down below in the comments. And as always, have a good one.